My friends, it's been said that Americans are faced with a choice between the stupid party and the evil party. And that once in a while, the two parties get together and they do something that's both stupid and evil. And this is called bipartisanship.
Well, as an American historian, I have some opinions on this subject that are based on history. And I think a lot of times people get caught up in whatever the current way of doing things is, and they become so intellectually bound up in that they sort of carelessly assume that nothing could ever be done differently from how it's done now. So, for example, we have Medicare now, and people think, well, if we didn't have Medicare, we'd be stepping over the corpses of old people on our way to work, right? I mean, of course, this would just be an epidemic of dead people in the street, and what would we do without it? Well, okay, well, this is where a historian can come in a little bit. I mean, if you look at 1961, you pick up a newspaper, do you see any headlines about corpses of old people filling the street? I mean, you don't see anything like that. To the contrary, what you find statistically, and if you can also bring in Medicaid dealing with the poor, is that people who are of relatively limited means were admitted to hospitals at about the same rate as people of much more significant means. And they had as many doctor visits, and so on. In terms of hospital stays, was also comparable. So the long and the short of it is, this isn't supposed to happen according to the conventional wisdom, which is that without the government, everybody would be dead, there'd be no health care. Well, what in fact happened? What accounts for this? And what accounts for it is that in the old days, everyone understood that part of the physician's occupation, part of his calling, really, involved the provision of medical services at low-cost rates or for free for people who couldn't afford it. And this is how Ron Paul operated his medical practice, even in the crazy modern system that we have now. And so it was understood that this was part of your job. And so this is how it worked. Now today, of course, no one does that, and there's too much, the malpractice possibility is too high. No one does that anymore. But when you actually look at Medicare and Medicaid, and you look at what were the actual consequences in terms of did people get more medical care than before, what we actually see is that what you had is a wealth transfer from middle-class taxpayers to middle-class health professionals. I mean, that's what you had. You had people now being paid to do what they had previously volunteered to do. And you also have, because of the government subsidy, a massive stimulus to an increase in the price of these goods. Anything the government gets involved in or encourages or stimulates, the price accelerates dramatically, just like higher education. I mean, what is it, like $500 zillion a year to go to some crummy third-rate school now? I mean, you think that's just a coincidence? Or that might have a teensy-weensy bit to do with the government saying, hey, here's an open, available credit spigot for anybody who wants to go. I mean, this is what leads to these things. If you look back earlier in American history, earlier in the 20th century, how did people get medical care in the early 20th century? They got it through fraternal societies that today have hardly any role at all because the government has usurped the whole role. But David Beto of the University of Alabama talks about this in his book, From Mutual Aid to Welfare State. It's a study of fraternal societies, a totally forgotten episode in American history. There are 50 zillion doctoral dissertations on every trivial nothing you can imagine, but nothing on this subject. And why? Well, because it suggests that we can, in fact, order our lives, including our medical care, without intervention by our wise overlords. And that, in fact, what happened was that these fraternal societies were able to contract with physicians and get group rates such that you could get a doctor visit for a couple of bucks, and people had abundant supplies of medical care, again, without government provision. So this world really does exist in history. I mean, it happened, it occurred. It's not like this is some crazy libertarian fantasy. You don't have to believe me. You can believe your own eyes looking back into the past. It really happened. So anything that moves in any other direction apart from individuals or groups contracting with individual physicians according to what suits them best is absolutely the wrong direction. So that's the brief perspective of a historian.